statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Greetings to you, Victoria Taft. And you're on the Adult in the Room podcast live stream, which we bring to you Tuesdays, Thursdays, 1 to 2 Pacific, 4 to 5 on the East Coast. And then you got to figure out all the other attendant day parts in your world. Okay, so much to talk about today. We're going to talk with Leslie Corbly. She's the author of a book called Progressive Prejudice, and we're going to talk about the indictment of James Comey and how that plays in with all sorts of other things going on in the progressive world and news items and that sort of thing. Ryan Mauro of the Capital Research group, he is doing a lot of research on the tactics of Antifa, which apparently we're led to believe doesn't exist anymore, but we'll get to that in a minute. But the ideological way in which Antifa has captured the homeless industrial complex, it's really, really pretty interesting. So, I mean, lots have been going on. Lots of things have been going on, she tried to say. And what's interesting is that James Comey has been indicted. We've got Middle East peace. We've got ending genocide in Gaza, and we've got 2 weeks of the Schumer shutdown. So many things going on, and then literally Hitler has come out to go capture his opponents, political and otherwise, his evil opponents. And so literally Hitler has been indicted, was indicted. Literally Hitler has indicted James Comey. Former FBI chief James Comey has been federally indicted for obstruction and for lying to Congress. He's pleaded not guilty. Now, people on the left point to the indictment of Comey by the Trump DOJ, and they say it's Donald Trump trying to get him back. And, it does sort of look like a payback kind of a situation. And here's an opportunity for you. Here's the follow-up question to that. Here's the follow-up. Payback for what? James Comey illegally spied on a candidate for president and later the sitting president of the United States. He did so knowing the premise for his investigation was fake. In 2016, July of 2016, before the election, he sat in the Oval Office with Barack Obama, Joe Biden, DNI Clapper, the AG, and others, and they were all told at the same time by CIA Director John Brennan that Hillary Clinton was running a political dirty trick. Shh, don't tell anybody that Trump is a Russian asset. Play along, wink, wink. A few days later, James Comey ordered an investigation into Trump using Hillary Clinton's known fake information as the basis for the investigation. Comey's agents lied on warrant applications to spy on Trump's campaign. And against all of their smart guy intelligence, you're not going to believe this, but Hillary didn't win the election. Hillary lost. And the rush to get Trump then became a nearly whole of government effort. Check this out. The FBI, CIA, NSA, the Democrats, the media, international spy agencies were all a part of this charade. In January, before he took office, Comey used Hillary's fake evidence to tell President-elect Donald Trump that he had blackmail material on him, and he knew it was fake, but he presented it to him anyway. He purposely told Trump about the fake Steele dossier to give the media a reason to report on it. CNN was holding on, just waiting to find out when, if Comey had told Trump about it so that they could report on something that they knew was a big stinker. And then he leaked a wrap-up of his Trump meeting to his friend to get the New York Times to report about it. And then he lied to Congress about leaking. So Comey says he leaked the intel later to trigger a special counsel, and he was very, very proud of himself, and he succeeded in doing that, and it lasted more than 2 years, holding up the Trump presidency. So they spied on Trump and his underlings to change the results of an election, and then once elected, to ruin the presidency of a duly elected president. Then they impeached him based on that same lie and obstructed his presidency the entire time based on the lie. These facts are not in dispute. There's a grand conspiracy to deny President Trump his rights. It started in that Oval Office meeting. And my question to you is, don't you think somebody should be punished for that? Honestly, it seems rather normal to me to believe that one should have to stand trial for trying to deprive a presidential candidate of his rights. Jim Comey did that. He tried to do that. And he isn't the only one. Plenty more people did it. And I imagine that this will be a long list of individuals who will then be touted by the media as, he's just getting back at these guys. And when they do that, when the media talk to you like that, ask the question, getting back for what? Leslie Corbly is my guest, and she's an author, a lawyer, and she is just recently released her book, Progressive Prejudice. And thank you so much for coming on the Adult in the Room podcast. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing well.
Thank you so much for spending some time. Tell me a little bit about how this James Comey thing and, big payback by the Trump administration and all that play into your major thesis, which is that there's a lot of prejudice on the part of progressives, but there's a real line of real hatred there as well. So take it away if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Well, I think it's an example in the political realm of what's occurring culturally, which is that there's not a lot of scrutiny put on the actions of those on the left. I think that individuals such as James Comey probably likely didn't really expect any of this to be their behavior to be scrutinized, maybe in the way they're comfortable scrutinizing others' behavior. And I think what we're moving into, both culturally, politically, and socially, is a time period where obviously we're a lot more tribal than we used to be, and I think that's going to continue to carry on the way it has been. And we're increasingly, I think the public is increasingly becoming aware of the fact that the way government actually operates in practice is not really the way it's been presented to the public as operating, right? We have a much different system of government than what the public has previously been aware of. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see where these investigations land, but the structure of the government itself, I don't think is going to be subject to change anytime soon, meaning we're going to continue to see these type of investigations from one party against the other back and forth.
For a while, I imagine so, because heretofore the Republicans never did anything about that. They just said, well, we're people, or Marquez, or, the Queensbury rules, whatever. And, according to Hoyle, we can't do that. Nevertheless, they always had the ability to bring the law to bear in cases where they'd been wronged.
Well, and I think a lot of that had to do with the gatekeeping of narratives and of cultural power within media. So I think a lot of the reason that Republicans were perceived as being maybe lapdogs for a very long time was that in order to attack, you have to have to some degree buy-in with the public. You have to get your narratives and your framing to the public. And that's, I think, what Donald Trump in some ways broke the left's stronghold on cultural narratives and on being able to frame issues in a way that always placed their opponents at a disadvantage. And that's what the left has been used to. They've been used to being sort of perceived as having moral authority, regardless of whether or not that moral authority was something they should have been receiving. And now that's falling apart. And that largely does have to do with the rise of Donald Trump. And, one can love
agreed.
Him, has little to do with that, but the left's sort of monopoly on framing narratives is sort of falling apart.
The other thing I believe is going on is that there is, in addition to losing the narrative, they've always been given the benefit of the doubt because, of course, they were the peaceful people. They were the people who just meant the best for everyone, and they never undertook a cause unless they wanted to do well for the people. And now it's being outed primarily that generally they do things to feather their own nests, is what it's coming down to. We've seen that with respect to the stuff that has happened with the Elon Musk Doge program, and we've found all these NGOs that were just, they were there to collect money, give it to their favorite projects, and then kick back money to the Democrats. I mean, it's just rinse and repeat over and over.
Yes, and that's you're absolutely correct in regarding what we're just seeing a lot of trend shifts. And again, it's fascinating because Donald Trump isn't a particularly conservative person. So, people talk about the rise of like the alt-right or the rise of conservatism. And I actually think that's more of a threat, but that's a threat generations down the line, right? To the extent that we're going to swing pendulum swing way too far right is a future threat. Right now, I mean, you look at what's considered right wing, and it's not even in political theory terms remotely conservative.
Right.
Donald Trump is like he's a Manhattan, essentially a Democrat from back in the day. So this idea that, we're pendulum swinging right, it's more like we're pendulum swinging away from the left. The left having sort of this absolute monopoly on defining the terms of debate, defining what is and isn't moral, and sort of having that gatekeeping power. And I think that that's causing a lot of flailing right now because they're losing, again, control of the narrative. And that's what they've had for the past, 50 plus years. I mean, all through the 20th century was an insurgence of left-wing thought, and that's crumbling before them because their system of ideas is being challenged. And I think those on the left are not familiar or comfortable with having their ideas scrutinized because they're not used to having to self-reflect and go, oh, maybe my idea here could cause harm to someone. They don't have to think about their own types of prejudice. They're only used to critiquing other forms of prejudice, right? Yeah. Oh, I see that this is I see the individuals who may fall on the margin of religious or conservative ideologies, for example, but they don't really see the individuals who fall on the margin of their preferred systems of thought because they don't really have a capacity, I don't think, collectively to self-reflect in that way yet and go, wow, there's some who could fall on that,
In a recent American Greatness article you wrote, you used this meme that was put forward by somebody else. I don't recall his name, but it was just the way.
Right. Yeah.
So tell me about this because this pretty much tells the story, and explain it.
So I think it kind of succinctly demonstrates how the left has sort of operated over the past, decades, which is where the center has not really changed, but those on the left have gone further and further left such that they see the center as really far right. And so they start to demonize and vilify anyone who thinks differently. So an increasing amount of purity of thought is focused on, right? If you disagree at all about trans ideology, you're a bigot. If you dissent at all regarding immigration, you're a xenophobe. If you have different opinions about, say, sexual ethics or things of that nature, you're a homophobe, right? These things that are completely detached really from reality. And the average person can kind of understand you can have different viewpoints and that doesn't mean you hate someone, but those on the left have really dug their heels into the sand that if you think differently, it's because you're fueled by hatred. And it's fascinating because they can't see how that itself fuels hatred, which is what's happening. This is on display with the public in these very, very public attempts at assassination, attempting to assassinate Donald Trump, and then in fact assassinating Charlie Kirk, which is that, again, this idea that I'm fighting hatred in this way, right? That there's these people who hate everyone and we have to sort of stop them at all costs. And it's a really damaging way to look at the world. And I think that increasingly the public is seeing it for what it is and saying you preach love, but you practice hate. And it's funny because it's kind of an inversion of what you heard a lot about Christianity on those on the right. Think of in the early 2000s when there was the campaign going on for gay marriage. It was really easy, I think, to vilify certain conservatives who would talk about God's love, and then they would maybe engage with those who were homosexual or who thought differently in a really kind of unhelpful way. Let's put it that way. Like they could be very belligerent or distasteful in the way they communicated, and it made it really easy for those on the left to latch on and say, you practice, you're talking about God as a God of love, but you practice hate. And I think they're running into that same problem themselves now, and they don't know how to contend with it, which is that they're talking about tolerance, love, compassion, grace, but they have none of that to extend to anyone who goes in their view, too far right, which is an increasingly, it could be, the guy who made that meme, I think, is like an atheist evolutionary biologist.
Yeah.
These are people who are not remotely right wing. I mean, and Donald Trump's been able to get them into his fold because of this dynamic where the left shoots so far left and they have blinders on. They can't see, how someone outside of the ideology is going to interpret their words or actions. And so, to no shock, those who are more moderate just go the other direction. They go to where they feel welcome, which is on the right.
So you say it's basically a religion. Right?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, well, I think in my belief, and people can disagree, I guess, with this premise, but I think at a certain point, any belief system becomes religious. You have to act it out. You're going to have certain taboos. You're going to have, gatekeeping of some kind of what ideas are acceptable and aren't acceptable, what things you can and can't enact, both culturally and individually. So I just don't really think that there's some clear-cut delineation between any belief system and religion. The reality is, at scale in a society, you're going to have a belief system that's being followed, and at some point that will look very religious. You're going to have sacred ideas, things we aren't supposed to attack, ideas we're supposed to all sort of venerate in some way, because that's how we collectively engage as humans. So that's just, as a premise level, I think to some degree it all collapses. But absolutely, on the progressive side, I think there's a very zealous religious-like zeal here that becomes very impractical. It's very reminiscent of fundamentalist religious mindsets, where it's not just that you believe the system, like one would believe religion. It's that